Hello everyone. My name is Kyle Nolla. I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Northwestern University. My PhD was in psychology and my dissertation covered gender and esports. So while my co-authors and I, the four of us, have or are pursuing academic training, today we are presenting primarily as from our experiences as volunteer community organizers within the Super Smash Brothers scene. So also, just FYI, I'll be displaying QR codes in this talk linking to resources that we've created, so be prepared to screenshot or follow those. Okay. So I just want to give you a little bit of background because every game and every esport is different and the context really matters in terms of what I'm about to tell you. So the Super Smash Brothers game series is a series that has been released for every Nintendo console. There are a series of fighting games or party games, depending on your perspective, and they've enjoyed millions of sales and really high critic ratings. So there's a lot of people who are familiar with this game from playing in their living room, from playing with their friends, and it's generally well known, especially because it uses intellectual property from other popular Nintendo games. What's interesting about Smash is, although it is a game that you could play on your couch very casually, it has a very successful competitive community. So you can see here on this esports chart, we have a lot of peak viewership across many years. We have prize pools that can support pro players' salaries and over 700 tournaments per year. So this is a very popular game among people to play actually competitively, head-to-head, trying to win. And it's no surprise then that this is a very beloved esport. People attend tournaments by the thousands and have there's an active fan culture for certain players that are successful. However, it was never meant to be that. So director of the Smash game series, Masahiro Sakurai, has gone on record in several different contexts saying that the game was not meant to be played competitively. He said in 2008 to Nintendo Power that the game has no competitive feature, and in 2014 in a Mashable interview that he's really designing for the fun experience of a party game, not for the competitive advanced players. So it's no surprise that there is no official management from Nintendo of the competitive community. So those hundreds of thousands of viewers, those millions of dollars, there's no one at the top saying where it goes or controlling or managing any of that. What that functionally leaves us with is a series of decentralized small groups located in different regions that don't necessarily connect with each other. And I'll go over a little bit of the history of that. That is why the talk is titled Grassroots, because this community really is grassroots. It really is people developing things together on their own. So in these settings, in each of these little islands, decentralized places, tournament organizers tend to be at the top. So most local level Smash tournaments look like the picture I have displayed here, where it's, 10 to 30 people in a room, sitting side by side, playing each other through a bracket. These are private events that are unregulated. So anybody can organize these, anybody can step up. A tournament organizer is typically someone throughout this talk that I will say organizes small events like this regularly. And so there's a local scene that grows. The thing about being a tournament organizer for these private events is that there is no licensing process, there's no training process, and often it's an act of passion. People organize these small tournaments at a financial loss. And again, because of the grassroots structure, these TOs don't necessarily have to talk to each other or agree about anything. They might be in contact because they are trying not to schedule, local ones might be in contact to not schedule over each other's events, but there's no formal structure to their relationship, which means every person for themselves. So as a result, somehow those millions of players, those 700 tournaments a year, those happen by players for players and in a small region. However, there was some shift in the 2000s and the 2013, 2015 area because online forums began to connect players and scenes. Larger state level events were able to be coordinated because people were all online using Smash boards to talk to each other, say how much they love the game, say how they want to play better players. So just for a sense of scale, in 2007, Evo hosted Smash and had a $640 prize pool. And in 2019, the last time Smash was at Evo, $35,000 prize pool. I have a picture here of the Book of Melee, which was written by a community member describing how things rapidly changed and grew over time. And in 2013 to 2015, especially, events tripled in size, tenfold even, with the release of really popular Smash games. So you can tell from the way this community grew, that there is definitely, and the fact that there's no regulation, there's a propensity for an old boys club mindset. Basically, those people that were posting on Smashboards, they're the arbiters of the community. Guess what? They're all a lot like each other in terms of like being men, having competitive ideals, etc. So that's the history, and that's where I'm going to start off today's case study, which was the Code of Conduct Initiative. As I mentioned, this QR code will lead you to all the materials that we produced for this initiative, and hopefully will give you some sense of the amount of work we put into it. So why, what, how? All right, in 2017 to 2018, there was actually a great need for a universal rule set. So not even having to do with player misconduct, toxicity, anything like that. Simply everyone agreeing what stages are legal, what characters are legal throughout the entire scene. And 30 community leaders came together to try to accomplish this agreement. While they were having these discussions, they also talked about the fact that there are players that are banned or have done really serious harm to other players that just move and go back to playing. And that perhaps if we're going to have a universal rule set, maybe we should also talk about having a universal way of handling player misconduct. My co-author, Josh Kassel, he became project manager to bring together a team under the heading of the harassment task force. So around 10 of us community members stepped forward, each of us with different kinds of training and different kinds of experience, and came together to try to establish basic a universal rule set, quote, for player behavior. So it was in about 6 months, we did all the work, most of the work that I'm going to describe to you today in terms of bringing together different resources and having a plan. So what are some of the initial documents that we developed? Well, first of all, we did a lot of research to develop all of the documents. We looked into the Esports Integrity Commission, which is a European organization that run by a lot of lawyers, and they have a code of conduct. We looked at pro player contracts. We looked at Title IX procedure, and we asked local lawyers and international lawyers as well to weigh in on the things we were creating, the ideas we were having, the lines we were trying to draw in the sand of what is acceptable behavior. So the biggest thing we created was a 15-page complete code of conduct. This is what the screenshot is here, that has covers all of our bases in terms of saying we're not a legal entity. This is not criminal law. Here are the kinds of things that are and are not acceptable. Here are the severity of offenses. So somebody wearing a t-shirt with a curse word coming to a tournament is not the same as someone committing sexual violence, for example. So this was a document that took the most time and we were most proud of because it really does cover everything from appeals to public communication to describing our procedures. Because we knew that most people don't read a 15-page document, we also created a bullet point kind of short form list, a 2.5-page version. And because we wanted this to be accessible to people who have been victims of misconduct, we created a step-by-step guide that included things like how to contact local police, how to talk to your local tournament organizer, and of course, how to file a report with our organization, this Code of Conduct Initiative, who would try to look in and investigate cases of misconduct. We also wanted to make sure that the tournament organizers who signed on to this initiative or were agreeing to hold their players to these standards had some way to communicate to people at their events that they valued these things. Thus, we had printable, high quality graphical examples. Again, these are all available at the QR code. We also took a lot of time on the form that people would submit if they wanted to engage in an investigation. Essentially, the report form functioned as, well, as a researcher, I would say, as a consent form. It outlined what is the code of conduct going to do, what should the expectations be. Please don't post to social media throughout this process. Please, by checking this box, I understand that the person who harmed me will be notified of the investigation and asked to provide their version of events. By checking this box, you understand that people are not, that this is a grassroots kind of process. This does not result in legal consequences, all those sorts of things. So each of these documents were well thought out. It took us about 120 work hours to produce all of these things between 10 people. Honestly, the initial 10 members only met probably 3 or 4 times in 1-hour meetings, and then we broke off into smaller groups to create each of these documents. So a significant amount of work and reflection went into these things. But of course, even if you have a plan, even if you have all of these documents, even if you've really thought about it, actually implementing a process for hearing reports, deciding on misconduct, and recommending ban advice or other forms of punishment for bad behavior, we didn't know how it would work in the real world. We had ideas, but we didn't know for sure how it would work. There were many practical unknowns. How could we get the most tournament organizers possible to sign on to this? How many volunteers would we need to hear one case? You know, if there are 3 to 5 panelists, or well, which is sort of like a jury member, right? Hearing a case, how many cases would we need to have going at once to actually keep up? How many hours would it take for people to review evidence, for people to come to decisions? What would we do if someone was upset with our advice and made legal threats, et cetera, et cetera? There are not many resources available, but one of the ones that I'm going to have later in a slide that says recommended reading, and that I definitely want to highlight here, is a freely available online resource, How to Respond to Code of Conduct Reports. This is a downloadable book that is extremely practically useful. So just want to highlight a few aspects of implementation that were interesting or notable. And one thing was reaching tournament organizers. And I will say, of all the things that this organization did right, we had a luck on reaching people, because those group of 30 members who tried to make the universal rule set, the 10 of us that were in on this part, we all were well connected and prominent tournament organizers within the scene already. So if you run one of the big national events that gets 3,000 players and you sign on to this code of conduct, a lot of people are going to be looking and saying, oh, what is this code of conduct? What is it doing? So in less than 6 months, we accrued over 77 tournament organizers. As I'll discuss later, we don't actually know what the reach of that is, but I will say that this included tournament organizers in several European countries, North America, and Mexico. So we thought this was pretty good, especially for a first try. And the way that we interacted with these tournament organizers was framing the code of conduct as a service. While they could deal with their local players, as people always have, if they felt like they were not trained well enough, or did not understand some of the gender dynamics, or did not understand or feel confident in their ability to adjudicate or create consequences and decisions, we could do that work for them. We would have the staff, volunteer staff, that were trained and had this process that involved multiple people from different backgrounds. The idea was that we were giving them advice, and making sure that these decisions could be communicated to a wide audience, so that players couldn't just move to another region and start playing again under a different tag, as had been previously in the scene. Another thing that we really put a lot of thought into was how to train volunteers. So besides just having a description of our internal process, both verbal and written, for the 2 main roles within the organization, which included the panelists or jury members and the case supervisors, or the people who organized each case. Those things, we can describe the basic process, which was outlined in some of those documents in the QR code here and the code of conduct itself. But we also had required readings on sexual violence, on jury bias, and in the interview phase of people applying to be a panelist, they had to demonstrate knowledge of these readings and sensitivity to the content that we had produced. Also, after our first sexual violence case, we had a very severe backlash from the community because we had taken a more restorative justice approach, but we decided to take a more punitive approach after that feedback, because a lot of the people who are typically victimized through sexual violence are minoritized in the gaming community to begin with. So we ended up creating another set of training materials for sexual violence cases that were developed with the help of a paid expert in sexual violence training with Title IX. And yeah, that was a thing. So once we started running this, once we started receiving reports, what did we actually do? We processed a total of 16 cases in about a year and a half. 7 were publicly described. Somebody actually made a Wikipedia page describing the entire history of the Smash Code of Conduct, and this was their little summary of the things that were publicly facing. But you know what? This wasn't fast enough. Like I said, we actually had really good reach. We had a lot of tournament organizers signing on. We had a lot of players looking to us, and we were receiving 2 to 4 credible cases with evidence seeking a ban per week. So 16 cases in that span of time is not enough. So why was it so slow? I'll get into that in the analysis section. But But to close the historical aspect of this talk, in 2020, Smash came to Smash had its Me Too moment with a flood of real serious accusations that began coming forward. We looked at our resources. We realized things weren't happening fast enough. We weren't going to be able to help the people we needed. I was extremely burned out trying to direct and manage this organization, and we folded. We made all of our resources available in this folder that I've been linking so that local TOs could look at them if they needed. So why didn't it work? So my current postdoc is actually in health, and there's a lot of health implementation science that is relevant here. So there's a PRISM model, the practical, robust implementation and sustainability model. And the success of any intervention depends on the intervention itself. How complex is it? How easy is it for its user base to use? The external environment, so how well does it fit into the existing culture? The infrastructure. So is the org itself well staffed? Do we have success metrics? And the recipients of the intervention. So is it well managed and does it address people's needs? By the same group of people, they also have another model, the REAIM framework. And it demonstrates that the impact of an intervention depends on reach, which we had, effectiveness, widespread adoption, successful implementation, and maintenance of the intervention itself. So I'm going to return to that intervention as soon as I describe to you some of the basic problems we have. So the number one problem I would say was lack of resources. So we had no financial resources. There was literally no funding and no backing to this project. So we were unable to attract and compensate skilled labor. And in fact, volunteers, it's really hard to ask people to do really difficult emotional work, reading people's experience of misconduct, which is sometimes serious and traumatic. And so we had really high turnover. It was also the case that we couldn't afford a lawyer because on retainer to protect us, which led to a general sense of anxiety. So one specific example of this, volunteers resigned in such numbers that cases came to a complete halt because we didn't even have 4 people that were actively available. So we had to halt all cases for almost a month as people were recruited, vetted, and onboarded. This also ties into a lack of human resources. So the esports and gaming community tend to be young. So they're well-meaning, but unexperienced or unskilled volunteers. So we were missing a lot of things like people with a lot of project management, public relations, follow through, responsibility, responding to emails, regulating their emotions. And that limits the spots that a lot of volunteers can fill. So that meant that when somebody with a lot of training, like the original 10 of us, steps down, they're tired, they're burnt out, that means there's only so many people that can fill that gap. This problem with community interaction. This is something that happens with much larger organizations than this grassroots initiative, but we did struggle with balancing community safety and player privacy, the people that were involved with these cases, with the community's need to feel like this thing was investigated well. So we did have to publicly communicate via a Twitter account when a ban was in place, but we couldn't say what the player did if we wanted to avoid defamation lawsuits. So that is tricky. We also ensured victims that when they submitted evidence to us, it would never be out in the public. And because of that, sometimes the public didn't understand why a ban decision was made. Finally, the signatory tournament organizers did receive in a monthly email the updates to cases and bans, and we did give them a little bit more detail, but technically that still opens us up to defamation lawsuits. This was especially notable in a case where someone who was a minor did serious harm to people and was banned indefinitely, but the public had no idea of the extent of the harm, and there was a lot of harassment and an entire hashtag Twitter campaign against the ban because the public didn't know. It's also true that in general, social media, the way that we were connecting to our community is divisive. So how can we, it's very difficult to actually enact good work there. So that did result, I was doxxed, and there was a lot of retaliation when someone popular was banned. It's also true that because as a grassroots organization, we lack legitimacy and trust. People are used to being independent and decentralized, and we were often viewed as an Illuminati, and we didn't have the skills to really repair that relationship. Finally, we had limitations to our operational power. Because this was an optional initiative and we had no idea how many TOs are in the United States to begin with, or anywhere, that we had no way to reach them, no way to compel them to follow our recommendations. And that is very different from when publishers have control of their game. which unfortunately resulted in a player playing the entire time he was banned at a local friends tournament. I'm sorry, I'm at 20 minutes. Do I need to stop?
It's fine. It's because we have the break right after. So if you could wrap up in 1-2 minutes.
Okay, so running through this very quickly, returning to this prison framework, it was easy for people to submit reports, but not easy for us to process them. We met a lot of resistance from the grassroots scene. We were generally understaffed and unable to meet the needs of our people. And we did have great reach, but we had no way to quantify our effectiveness, adoption, implementation, or we were unable to maintain. So I will run through this really quickly. We looked at a cities version after the fall of the international COC, and they attempted to create a code of conduct for themselves, but it fell through. Nobody actually followed through. So we surveyed some players in this area, and we found that they had mixed responses to the TOs. Specifically, they saw that this wasn't very effective. However, 73% of the 26 players surveyed still said that they would approach a TO. TOs also acknowledge that they have no training and that this is still a very difficult thing to do without the International Code of Conduct. So what can we draw from that? The city level the city level initiatives have a lot of the same problems as the national initiative, but they still retain legitimacy and operational power over their own tournaments, so they can still ban players. There are other city level initiatives besides Pennsylvania that have been successful, so it all depends on the leadership, player base, and demands. What do I want you to take away from this talk? I want you to know that you should still do this. Although I'm describing something that could be framed as a failure, it's really a resource, and it's really a resource-heavy endeavor. It impacts your players a lot. Actually addressing misconduct helps prevent mental health problems in players. It protects minoritized players and ensures player engagement. When you're creating a system, especially if you're a bigger company that has a lot of resources, you're going to need multiple full-time employers, and you're going to need to take stock of the things you have: financial resources, expertise, and operational power. We also want to emphasize that sexual violence training and the human cost of this work should not be underestimated, and you should be accountable to your community. I do not recommend trying to rely on volunteers and self-moderation like many forums do. For larger communities, you're going to need full-time staff, and you're going to need some way to support them and give them resilience and a good work-life balance. So I have some recommended readings here, depending on what parts of this talk interested you. I have some references here, depending on for the academically minded people. And I'd like to thank all the people that helped build this organization and provided data and insights. All of our contact information is available here, and I'm happy to answer questions via email or via the Q&A. Thank you.